Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. I ended up buying myself a light to make the lighting down here a little bit more boisterous, I guess you could say, so that maybe everything looks a bit better. We'll see. This will be the first video I've done with this new lighting uh, mechanism, and we'll see how it goes. And today I thought we'd do another mixed haul because I got a bunch more stuff um, from thrift stores and private sales and um, other places, let's say. And so let's get to it. It shouldn't be too bad. It's not as much as it was in the last video, but we'll see how it goes. All right. So let's. Oh, and I also watched a whole bunch of movies, so I thought I'd maybe show those as well. Some of them were from this haul, some of them are from previous hauls, but I didn't want to show them until I watched them, and then I'll show them. Right. So all right. So the first one is I did not watch this one, but I did watch this one when it first came out in the mid '80s. It won an Oscar, a few Oscars actually, I think, and that is Amadeus. All right, which basically is a funny biography of uh, you know Mozart, right? So um, and it's directed by Milos Forman, a director that I collect. I also have this already on DVD, but I didn't have it on Blu-ray. This one is a nice book form. What do you call it? Digipack Blu-ray, brand new. I found it in it originally sold for $32.99 back in the day, and whoever bought it for $32.99 never opened it, and then it ends up in a thrift store, and I end up finding it for $4. So that's pretty cool, and it's a nice version. It has a bunch of special features, supplementary features, commentary by Milos Forman and writer Peter Schaefer, the making of Amadeus, the theatrical trailer, bonus disc, special CD compilation from the film. So got a lot of good stuff on it. Here's a picture on the back. I don't want to open it until I decide I'm going to watch it, right? So if you look at this part here, that's what you get in this. So um, I thought that was kind of cool. I went $4. I'll pick that up. All right, so it improves my library. All right, so that's Amadeus, and basically like I said, it's a funny biography of Mozart. Um, that's all I remember it. All right, next up is this DVD called The White Stripes Under a Black Pool Lights. All right. And man, I love the White Stripes. Do you like the White Stripes? I mean, I don't usually buy concert videos. In fact, I've mentioned in previous videos that they don't have any interest. I'll pick them up if I'm going to resell them. But every once in a while, I'll come across a concert that I'll pick up and I'll keep because I want to watch it over and over. One was, The Song Remains the Same from Led Zeppelin. I found the Blu-ray for that. In a previous video, I showed it to you. That one's a really good concert. And this is an extremely good concert as well. All right. This is in Blackpool, England in January of 2004. And basically, um, Meg and Jack White go through like 26 songs of their repertoire, much of it live. They're very good live. Much of it is really good. A couple of songs there are a bit, it's on DVD, it's not on Blu-ray or 4K. So sometimes the sound isn't as good as it could be, but it is pretty damn good. In fact, it's good enough for me to watch it on the TV just on basic, TV speakers. I enjoyed it enough to watch that. But the White Stripes, they're like when they came out with their first album back in the early 2000s. It was in the early 2000s, right? Late 1990s, early 2000s, I think. Um, then culminating in what was the name of the album with Seven Nation Army on it and those songs there. Anyways, I'll show it here. Anyways, I just went and I bought all of their CDs back in the 2000s when I came across their first CD, right? So they're extremely good live as well, and he is one hell of a guitar player, right? So you'll see him play like two or three different types of guitars depending on the songs, and you'll see Meg White on the side of the stage beating away on her drums, and it has all their hits, all their great. Of course, personally, I think they have like three songs that are their best, and that's obviously Seven Nation Army. The other one is Fell in Love with a Girl, and the third one is The Hardest Button to Button. Those are my three favorite um, White Stripes song. But if you like the White Stripes, you should look for this. I think it has a Blu-ray release as well, but I've only found this one. I found this for $3 at a thrift store. I picked it up, and like I said, I don't watch concerts, but when I saw this one, I said I got to get this one. I want to watch this one, right? So it's rare that I'll watch live concerts. I find live concerts to be quite boring. I would rather listen to their CD and not have to watch something because it's the music that I'm interested more in the visual more than in the visual because it's basically somebody on stage singing into a microphone, somebody playing a guitar, somebody playing drums, and they're doing that for an hour or 2 hours, right? It's not like they're doing anything much more than moving around, right? So um, I don't find a really huge fascination with somebody, you know, playing their musical instrument. I don't find that person on a piano doing all that the result of it is what blows me away rather than just watching them moving their fingers or a person playing the guitar really well. That doesn't really blow me away as much as the sound that's coming from it that they're producing, right? So, and I can get that on a CD. Um, I don't need to focus my eyes and my ears. In fact, I think my eyes kind of, what is it, distract from the actual, you're concentrating more on what they're doing, even though they're not doing much because they're on a small stage, um, than you are in listening to music sometimes. And it's better just there's some mediums that you just close your eyes and listen, and music is one of them where uh, the more you take your eyes or your other senses out of it, the more you can appreciate and enjoy the music. All right. So next up is Blu-ray copy of Midway, which is a what? Roland Emmerich. Basically about the bombing of Pearl Harbor and then the fight between the Japanese and the Americans at Midway. The Midway Islands. Um, it's not the best acted film in the world. The visuals on it are really awesome. The airplane fights, the explosions, and everything else really cool. But the acting was okay. But none of Roland Emmerich's uh, action films, are to be taken too seriously when it comes to the acting part of them. Um, what's fun to watch is the visual, the CGI and all this. It's really fun to watch, shit blow up and everything, right? So it's really fun to watch Emmerich, and that's why I collect them, right? I mean, like what was that Jake Gyllenhaal film where the ice age hits New York or whatever? That one was that one, and Independence Day is probably the one that everybody will mention as probably their best. The Will Smith one about alien invasions. That was the last film I ever saw at a drive-in before drive-ins kind of disappeared. But anyway, all right. So that's Midway. Next up is Jonah Hex, and this. Um, I used to read the comic book a lot, and that may influence why I like this film so much. But most people pan this film. All right, it's based on a comic book, the Jonah Hex comic book, and the Jonah Hex comic book was quite fun to read because it was like a cowboy genre type of um, comic book, but there was no other comic book that was like it. Right? It's all superheroes and everything, and when you did get into the westerns, it was more like straightforward kind of hokey type of stories put to comic books, right? So this one was not that way. This one is gunslinging, and you had like an anti-hero who was the main character, which was Jonah Hex kind of thing. And, you can talk to the dead and everything else. It's pretty cool stuff I found when I was a kid reading those comic books. So when they came out with the film version, I went to see it in the theater, and then I finally found it on Blu-ray. All right, it's directed by Jimmy Hayward. Don't know who Jimmy Hayward is. I don't collect his films, but Jimmy Hayward, I do like this film, and picking Josh Brolin as Jonah Hex, extremely good choice, very good choice. All right, and like I said, most people panned this film, but I really enjoyed it enough to add it to my library. All right, next up after that is Duets. All right, This one is directed by Bruce Paltrow and stars Gwyneth Paltrow. I wonder if they're related. I bet you they are. I should have looked at that before. But the main reason why I got this film is because of him, Paul Giamatti. I really like him as a director, as a actor. He blew me away in Sideways. If you have not seen that film about the nice wine trip and all the crap that went on during that film, extremely good. And I really enjoyed his over the top performance in Shoot 'Em Up. If you ever seen that film, most people panned that film as well, but I really liked him in that. He was like over the top with that. It's like he was like a cartoon character in that film. But uh, so it was attractive enough for me to, when I saw this, to pick this up. All right, and it's a Kino Lorber studio classic DVD, not a Blu-ray, right? But it's a Kino Lorber, and Kino Lorber puts out some interesting stuff. It's hit and miss with Kino Lorber, though. I mean, they do put out a lot of movies that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise, but a lot of those movies you don't really want to see because they're not really good, right? So they're not very good, right? So, but this one is not that. This one is a pretty good film. It's basically a movie surrounding karaoke, and you get into um, people's lives. And what's her name from the standout was Paul Giamatti, but what's her name? I can't remember her name. I'll put it up here. She's from ER, and she plays like this karaoke singing girl that travels around the country and sleeps with whoever she wants, and like this really independent, slutty type of character that was quite eye-opening in a bit, and she really took over the film in a lot of ways, right? So and you do have Huey Lewis in it as well, from Huey Lewis and the News. But everybody's like blown away from the singing in this karaoke thing, and I didn't think the singing was all that great in it, but that's just me. All right, but it's a good film to watch if you like karaoke, which I do, and if you don't, some of the stars in it were really good as well. All right, and then I picked this up new off of Amazon because it was at a really good price, and that's the Maze Runner trilogy. All right, and I watched all three of the films. Um, I wasn't as impressed with the films when I first watched them, and on second watch, um, I still enjoyed watching them. But they're not the greatest films on the planet. It's basically about the film starts off with this guy coming up in an elevator into this enclosed space surrounded by a wall, and there's a maze on the other side of the door that this prison, outdoor prison, is. And they have these people running into to map the maze in order to escape it, right? But then it goes from there, and you end up getting into the whole dystopian apocalyptic world that all this is involved in. And it's not bad. It's basically another zombie film, basically, because there's like some sort of virus or whatever that kills the world, and all these zombies are out there, right? So, but it was fun to watch. I would watch it again, and it's good enough for me to buy it new and put it in my library. And then I found this from a private sale, and that's the 4K release of all the four um, Men in Black films. All right, and I liked them, especially the first one. What's his name? I keep forgetting his name, right? So is it Vincent D'Onofrio? Vincent D'Onofrio, I think. He plays the bug in this one. I don't know. You've probably seen Men in Black, the first one, where there's this agency, this undercover agency that patrols and polices alien life forms on Earth, right? And the adventures they get into with Will Smith and Rip Torn as his boss. I remember that. Will Smith and what's his name? Man, I'm such bad for names. Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, right? So Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones play agents, and they go police aliens that are on Earth, and it's quite funny in a lot of places, and the action is pretty good. But who steals the show in the first film is the guy that I just mentioned um, as the bug. He does a really good job. Like he takes over a farmer, right? And he goes inside. He's a bug, but he like a big cockroach or whatever. He goes inside the farmer and he takes over his body and the movements and the physical acting um, he did was quite believable and quite. He's an extremely good actor, and he ended up, going on from there to star in some TV shows. One Netflix show where he played, the Kingpin in the Daredevil series. He did a really good job at. I got an itchy ear for some reason. Um, and and so I watched all four of them. They slowly. I like the first one. I like the second one with, is it Serena? Serena, what's her name? Laura Flynn Boyle in it, where she plays a bad girl looking for the light or whatever. Anyways, all four of them are fun to watch, but um, it was kind of overkill. And the fourth one, where you don't get Will Smith or any of the others, it's like international, was okay as well. But I don't know. I think the franchise has lived long enough. All right. Next up is Bayonetta, Bloody Fate. I picked this up because I like watching anime. All right, and I watched the first 30 minutes of this film and I turned it off. It was that bad. All right. The actual anime is very good. All right, but the storyline and the acting or the voices of the actors is not good at all. It was painful to try to get through. So I'm just going to probably resell this. I'm not putting it in my library. All right. After that is Marathon Man, which I talked about in my last. I think it was the last video I did. Marathon Man, one of the greatest films in my library that I really enjoy. This does have a Blu-ray, and I think it has a 4K edition as well. But right now, I'll satisfy myself with just the um, DVD because I haven't found the other ones yet. But it wasn't in my library, and now I have it, which is cool. And I spoke about the dentist scene, and it was. I did some more research since the last video I did, and yeah, the dental scene was much larger. But from my understanding, what uh, watching the extras from the DVD and doing some research online or whatever, um, people would, you know, when they first screened it, people got up because they couldn't handle the dental scene. They got up and left the theater and came back after the dental scene was over. And then they said, okay, maybe we should cut the dental scene, and I think they did cut it. But when I saw it, I mean, it was like a long time ago. It was like in the early '80s that I saw this film. It came out in '77, but I saw it in the early '80s, and I saw it on TV. It was either the movie network or late night TV, or I'm not sure. But I think I saw the uncut version of it because that dental scene that I saw in this DVD version of it is quite short. But when I saw it, it was a lot longer, and there was no cut in between it. It was like one long session of him saying, "Is it safe?" and then attacking Dustin Hoffman's teeth, right? So it was much longer. It was much more, difficult to get through just that drilling and that poking and everything. It's like, oh man, man, man. And I go, yeah, I'm never going to forget this scene. But then when I saw it on this DVD, and I saw it later on, like I've watched it numerous times, and the the dental scene doesn't hold as much weight anymore. It's either me because I've aged, um, and when I first watched it, the scenes are exactly the same as it is in this DVD. I just was much more powerful the first time I watched it, and now I'm just compensating for it because it doesn't seem as powerful now as it did then. But it's like no, some of it was cut out. It had to have been cut out. But from my understanding, when they first screened it, that's when they cut it, right? So I wouldn't have been seeing the original version of the dental scene because they had already cut it before they released it in all the theaters. But I could be wrong because I think I saw it on the movie network, um, or First Choice it was called at the time in Canada. It's like HBO or whatever in Canada. There was First Choice first was the name of it. Where you get the higher cable channels and you can subscribe to that, and it's basically 24-hour movies all the time. Um, and they would come to First Choice out of the theater, right? So and then there was a Super Channel came out, which was a direct competitor of them, and then they both combined into what was called the Movie Network at the time, right? Um, so I think I saw it on one of those ones, and that was back in like the early part of the '80s. That First Choice Super Channel, and then the Movie Network came out was early '80s, like around like 1982. I'm thinking 1983, somewhere around there, 1981, 82, 83, somewhere around there, right? Um, and that's where I think I saw Marathon Man for the first time, and that dental scene was like spine tingling, that kind of reaction, right? And you would never forget it, right? So then I watch it now, it seems kind of tame, but it might be because I'm aging. Anyway, so that's Marathon Man. Next up is an early Coen Brothers film, and that's Raising Arizona with a young Nicolas Cage. All right, and this basically is quite the comedy. It's about a guy who likes to rob stores and banks and stuff, and they're going to jail a bunch of time. Then finally, he meets a police officer, a female police officer who he is smitten with, and then he rights his ways and gets married to her and wants to raise a family, but then realizes that they can't have kids, so then they end up kidnapping a kid from another family who had quintuplets, right? And it goes on from there. It's quite a funny film. I don't think it's their best film or close to their best film. I would choose a good four or five other Coen films over this one, but this is what started to establish the Coen brothers as one of the greatest, film directors in American film history, right? And then here's the next one. It's called Bittersweet. Noel Coward's Bittersweet, and it starts Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. Now, Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy starred in the 30s and 40s. This one came out in 1940. Um, I don't know how many films. It got to be at least a dozen films that they starred in. They're both opera singers, or like opera-like singers. They worked in the opera and they worked on film, and they did a bunch of movies together. I'm actually watching the second one that came out in 1935 right now, but I watched this one first, and it's directed by Van Dyke. What's his name? W.S. Van Dyke. Um, both of the films that I'm watching, the second one that I'm watching right now, as well as this one, directed by Van Dyke, and Van Dyke has some pretty good films, and I quite enjoyed this film. It's like a musical. It's basically about a piano player who has a student, but she's not like a kid or anything. She's like an adult, um, uh, teaching her music, and they kind of hit it off, but she's kind of betrothed to another man, so they end up running away and getting married and living quite poorly because of it. But um, he's writing an opera that if he could get that opera noticed, they could be living in the lap of luxury because you get paid a lot of money for this opera. And but then he ends up, well, I won't kill it for you, but something happens that's tragic in it, and it goes from there. But I found it quite interesting, and I think I'm gonna probably watch as many of the McDonald Eddy films as I can because they're quite interesting. Now, this one was originally in black and white, but they Technicolored it. All right, in 1940. Um, they used Technicolor to make it a color film. All right, so the one I'm watching from 1935, which is Naughty. I can't remember the name of it right now. It's Naughty something. Naughty. Anyways, it's in black and white, so we'll see. Uh, but so far, I'm enjoying that second film as well. So, all right. So, what else do we have? Okay, we have The Lure, um, one of the great modern Polish films. I think this was published in 2015 or something, 2006, 2015. All right, and directed by who directed this? My goodness. I'm sorry, Agnes, if I really brutalize your name. It's a Polish name. Agnieszka Smoczynska. Smoczynska? Smoczynska. Anyway, she directed this film, and Criterion picked it up and put it in their collection. It's number 896 in the collection. All right, it's a Blu-ray, and I found it on a recent travel trip of mine. I found it for only $10, which is cool. Um, but basically, the film is about two mermaids. It's basically a retelling of Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, except it's twisted, more twisted, and yeah, she takes a bunch of license to it. But anyways, it's about two mermaids who end up hearing a band play near the ocean. They come out of the ocean and they join this band and they go play in this nightclub as backup singers originally, and then they kind of take over. They're kind of stripper singers in this club. And then one's called Silver and the other one's called Golden, if I remember correctly. And Golden kills the guy, and Silver falls in love with one of the band members. And but the problem is that if she falls in love with him, and she wants to get rid of her tail, then she loses her voice, like in Hans Christian. But in this one, it just doesn't. Her. It's not like she comes out of the ocean and her fin turns into legs as she comes out of the ocean, or she makes a wish and it turns into legs or whatever. No, she has friggin' surgery to cut off her uh, fin and put legs on, right? So, and anyways, it's quite interesting. I'm not going to ruin the whole thing, but it's basically, two mermaids come into into the world from the sea, right? So, and it was a pretty good film. You won't forget it after watching it, that's for sure. And I found this one. I picked this one up because it's directed by Robert Zemeckis, the guy that did the Back to the Future films and others. Polar Express is another one that he did. Anyways, this is basically the retelling of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. About the three ghosts, Jacob Marley and Scrooge, and Jim Carrey plays Scrooge in this. So uh, gotta love Jim Carrey, right? So I'll add that to my collection. I didn't even have it on DVD, so I found it on Blu-ray before I found it on DVD. All right, let's do some books now. First up is Stephen King's Misery. All right, nice paperback. I don't know why they make these. A lot of the Stephen King books are really tall and thin. I'm not sure why they don't make them thicker and shorter, but anyways, that's how some of his books come. Um, anyways, Misery. If you have not watched it, watched it. It has been put into a movie. I think it was directed by Rob Reiner, but don't quote me on that. But originally it was a book, a Stephen King book, and it's basically about this crazy woman who is kind of like introverted. She doesn't go out in the world much, but she really, really likes these books written by this author about this specific character uh, who the author has, written numerous books on. And she hears a rumor that he's tired of writing about this character, so he's going to kill her off. And it just so happens that while he's writing that book, he ends up getting caught in a snowstorm or has a car accident of some sort, and then um, this woman ends up finding him and bringing him to her house and nursing him back to life. But the reason why she's doing it is to force him to keep him hostage and force him to uh, change the book so that the character doesn't die, so that he can continue writing because it's her whole life kind of thing. She's his number one fan kind of idea, like a really sick person, let's say, and some pretty brutal stuff happens in the book. All right, so if you haven't read it, it's a pretty good read. But I've said previously, although Stephen King is one of the greatest horror writers, and so many of his books have turned into some really good films, um, I've always liked his fantasy writing more than his horror writing. I really like, The Eye of the Dragon. I really like The Stand. I really like, what was that other one? The Talisman. All right. The Dark Tower series. I've read some of those books as well, the Gunslinger and stuff. That was pretty good. But then I kind of gave up on Stephen King after reading it. That was that scene in the sewers where Stephen King thought it'd be a good idea that they get lost in the sewers, and there's like 3 or 4 boys and one girl, and they're all in their early teens or whatever. And he thought the best way for them to figure out how is the girl says, I know I can figure out how to get out of the sewer, but all you boys have to bang me in order for me to be able to think properly, in order for us to get out of the sewer. So it's a big orgy with underage kids or whatever, right? I went, oh yeah, okay, that's enough for me, and then I stopped reading Stephen King after that. All right, so next up is another book. It's called Margaret Laurence by Clara Thompson. Now, if you're not Canadian, you may not know who Margaret Laurence is, but she's written some of the best fiction novels in Canadian history. The Fire Dwellers, there's the whole Maniwaki novels. There's like 4 novels in the Maniwaki series. They're not like one series. It's just Maniwaki is this made-up place that she created, I think in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, and then that's the setting for like a bunch of her novels. Anyway, so Clara Thompson does a short biography on it. Now, this is part of um, the New Canadian Library, which I've talked about many times during the videos that I've done over the last year or so. I actually did a video on the New Canadian Library. If you really want to learn about Canadian literature, that's a great place to go looking for the books. Anyway, so there's 3 sections in the New Canadian Library. There's like the main section, which is all the novels and some short stories and some literary criticism, and then there's like 212 of those. I can't remember the exact number anymore. Um, and then there's 2 offshoots. One is the poetry, which is a group of like 12 or 14 novels, or I can't remember how many. Anyways, just watch the video. So there's 3 sections. There's the novels, basically, and then there's the poetry, and then there's the biography. And I can't remember how many of these, see how thin the book is. It's basically a little write-up on some of the best Canadian authors, and they're all with the W. So this is W3 in the series. I think there's 12 to 18 of them. I don't know. I can't remember. I'd have to look that up again. Um, it's been such a long time. I used to have a website all about this New Canadian Library. I'm basically, I don't want to boast, but I'm basically probably the main expert on this. But it's been, like probably a good 10 years, 8 years since I've worked on these sets of books. Anyways, I created a whole uh, website for it, and I had it up for a good 5, 10 years, and then I let it go. But you can still find it if you put in New Canadian Library in Google, and you look down at the footnotes at the bottom. You're going to see a footnote of my website, and they've archived the website, right? Because it's gone. I didn't want to pay the money each month for the website if I wasn't working on it anymore, and I basically went through basically the whole library already by that time. At that time, I was looking for like exceptions and things. Like there are some interesting, minute things about the library. Like there's some movie tie-ins with the library that you wouldn't even know it was a New Canadian Library book because of the way the book, and there's some different writing and printing differences between some of the books. Anyway, um, so I have that all. It's all archived with Wikipedia. If you go down to the bottom of the New Canadian Library page and you go down to the bottom, you'll see a New Canadian Library uh, footnote that has a link to it. And you press it and you'll get my website. It's still there, but it's just not, I'm not supporting it right now. All right, so part of the reason why that is because I had it on one server, and then it was an American server, and I said I should bring that to a Canadian server. So I ended up transferring the website from the American server to the Canadian server, and then screwed it all up. Like half the images didn't load anymore. And I talked to them about it, and they said, no, they're loading fine on our end. Why aren't they loading on your end? And I never went any further than that. And I said, oh, screw it. I'm just not going to pay a monthly fee for it anymore. And but this is basically the W, which is the writers series of the New Canadian Library. There's less than 20 volumes in this set, and they're very, very difficult to find because there wasn't a lot of them published, right? I have most of them still, right? I've been selling off my collection of the New Canadian Library. Like I said, I've I've done enough research on it to know it back and forth. But and once I learn something, I like to move on to something else, right? So um, anyway, so if you ever find any books that look like this, they're little write-ups of different Canadian authors, some of the best Canadian authors. All right, so I found that and I picked it up. All right, next up after that is Pollyanna, which is one of the great children's books. It's basically about an orphan, Pollyanna. She's an orphan. She ends up moving in with her spinster aunt or whatever. I think she was a spinster. Um, but she has this game that she plays. Pollyanna does. So she's never down, never depressed or sad. It's look at the bright side game. I can't remember what was it called. I don't know. There it is, the Glad game. So so she has this game called the Glad game. No matter what situation you're in, always look at the positive. There's always something positive, even in negative things that happen to you, right? So anyway, so she goes to this town, and this town is kind of a depressing town, and she kind of brightens it up, even convinces her spinster angry aunt to look on the brighter side of life and everything, and then something tragic happens to her, and will she still be able to think positively with this tragedy? And you'll have to read the book to know. But basically, it's a great book on uh, how to cope with good and bad things that happened into your life, and a lot of it has to do with the way you think about things on whether your life is a positive, happy one or not. All right. Next up is Margaret Atwood's greatest book, in my opinion. Although Surfacing and The Edible Woman are both really good as well, but this is A Handmaid's Tale. It's basically her dystopian novel. It's up there with 1984, Brave New World, We, Fahrenheit 451, all these dystopian novels that are out there. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? um, Jennifer Government. If you haven't checked that one out, check that one out. That's really good. Um, but this one is about what type of world will we live in where only a very, 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 very small percentage of the population of women are able to give birth. In other words, women have lost the ability to bear children, and what kind of world we'll look in when there's only, let's say, 1% or 0.1% of the population of women will actually be able to give birth. And Margaret Atwood uh, looks at it in a dystopian way, right? So um, she's quite the feminist, so she looks at it. And actually, this turned into a movie starring Robert Duvall. And then from a movie, it went into a TV series as well, much later on. So, but none of them compared to the book. The book is extremely good if you have not read it. All right, so that's The Handmaid's Tale. Except after that is I found three books in the Arcturus collection, the cheap collection that I keep talking about, where I'll get 10 of them and I'll sell them for $30. I found three more of them, and basically it's The Awakening, which is one of the first, I guess, feminist novels of all time. This came out in 1899. All right, and it's basically a woman's search for freedom, how she does want to be stifled in a marriage, and so on and so forth. Actually, I wonder if Margaret Atwood read this book, because one of her books, I think was it Surfacing? It might be Surfacing or The Edible Woman. I can't remember which one. Has a kind of the same type of theme where traditional life for women was quite oppressive, and Chopin wrote a character who decided to fight against that, and follow her own way of doing things, right? So next, the second book of that is Madame Bovary, all right, and this is quite the scandalous novel at the time. It was published in what, in the 1850s. Anyways, Robert got arrested and charged or whatever for it, but he beat it. He ended up becoming exonerated from it. But basically, it's about a woman who decides that she doesn't want to. It's another one of those where she decides that she's in a loveless marriage, so she ends up cheating with two other guys and everything. Some bad stuff happens to her. So it's quite the read as well. And here's my favorite, probably my all-time favorite novel from the, let's say, 1800s, from the 19th century, um, by a woman. Okay, so Silas Marner, by George Eliot. All right. So George Eliot, you would think is a man's name, but it was a pseudonym for a girl, Mary Ann. I can't remember her real name, but she would pen it with a man's name because women aren't supposed to publish books, or sometimes they're looked down upon if they do and everything. So she kind of had a pen name. But basically, this is an extremely, extremely good book, and it's not super long. Um, it's based Silas Marner is the main character of Silas Marner, and it's basically he is living in the city, and he gets accused of a crime that he didn't commit. All right, because his best friend committed it and framed him for it. So he ends up. Um, can't remember if he ended up in prison or what, but anyways, he's exiled or he left and he moves to a small town. He stays to himself. He lives in this house and he supports himself by sewing clothes, making clothes, and things like that. And he becomes a miser and he ends up collecting and saving all his money because he never goes anywhere. And then basically he gets robbed again. All right, well, the first time he gets accused of stealing money from the church, which he didn't do, and then the second one, a neighbor or whatever, a rich man's son, ends up stealing all of his money all of his gold that he was hoarding or whatever, um, and so he ends up going into this deep depression. But what happens is there's the rich man has a son, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on this, but anyways, there's a rich man who wants to marry this woman but can't marry this woman because he's already married to this other woman who's a bit of a harlot or whatever and is not in town anymore. But she's coming back to declare that she was his husband and all that, and she has a baby girl or whatever, and she ends up caught in a storm or whatever. She ends up dying, and the baby girl ends up at Silas Marner's front door, and so he takes her in and he ends up raising her himself, and that is the joy of his life, right? And it turns his whole life around and it makes him more part of the community. His next door neighbor helps him raise the girl. Meanwhile, there's a secret surrounding that girl, and that comes out later on in the end of uh, at the end of the novel and everything. Just such a really well written, really good story. It's a gripping story. It's like grabs a hold of you. I read it in like one or two sittings. It was extremely good, and George Eliot's probably my favorite of the 19th century novelists, like the Bronte sisters or you know you know Pride and Prejudice. Those books. I can't remember the name of the author. Such I'm so bad for names as I get older. All right, so next up is Mordecai Richler's Cocksure. All right, Mordecai Richler is one of Canada's greatest novelists. So many of his books are being read by Canadians, but his best is probably The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which actually turned into a movie as well, starring. Yeah, I want to bring up another name. He was the scientist or whoever in Jaws, right? Richard Dreyfuss. All right, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. But this one, Cocksure, I think this won the Governor General's. Yeah, won the Governor General's Award, which is Canada's great literary award, right? And this is about Mortimer Griffin, all right, and during the swinging '60s of London and Montreal. I won't go into it. If pick up Richler if you want to read some Canadian literature. I'll start with The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, but he's really good with. He's got a sly sense of humor. And a lot of his books are that way, and he this book is more satire than sly humor, but um, he has a humor about him that's quite intriguing when you read his books. Next up after that is William Golden's Caleb Williams. All right, and this basically is a book about um, being accused of a crime, if I remember correctly. Um, anyways, I don't really want to talk. It's an extremely good book. Actually, it's like a trilogy of books, but they have it all in one volume, it seems. Anyways, what I like to talk about when I find these is uh, the Broadview Press. This press, it's a Canadian press, if I remember correctly. And what they do is I kind of relate them to to let's say the book equivalent of the Criterion Collection, where the Criterion Collection will put out some, movies that they feel are great and they're being ignored or they're not in circulation. So what they'll do is they'll every once in a while they'll put out a more mainstream film, let's say like a Wes Anderson film or like The Rock or Silence of the Lambs or these type of films. They'll put in the Criterion Collection because they're good or whatever. But the main purpose of it is to get some revenue from sales so that they can take that money and put out something that's a little bit more obscure. Well, what Broadview does is similar to that. Um, and they'll put out like more mainstream classic novels and get some money so that they can put out less known works from let's say visual minorities or women and so on and so forth that aren't aren't seen enough and loved enough, right? So they kind of do that. So Caleb Williams is basically um, that kind of book, all right. And another thing with the Broadview text is that you just don't get the book, all right. You get um, a lot of scholarship with it as well. Let's All right. So what did this one get? All right. So here, the originality of Caleb Williams will be obvious to the student or general reader who encounters it in this exemplary addition to the Broadview literary text series. The editor. The editors provide a clear, thorough introduction that places the novel in its political, philosophical, and literary contexts, as well as a chronology and a bibliography. Six appendices appendices serve up generous helpings of the fruits of recent scholarship that illuminate the fiction's relation to things as they were, providing glimpses of Godwin at work, samples of the ardent political discourse of the 1790s, and snippets of narrative by Holcroft, Wollstonecraft, Richardson, Defoe, and less well-known writers. The supplementary materials are fascinating. All right, and also in addition to the text itself, the editors have included an extensive selection of primary source materials from the period ranging from Godwin's original manuscript ending and excerpts from his political writings to contemporary reviews, the political writings of Burke and Payne, and materials on criminals and the English prison system. So basically, you get the book, but then you get all the scholarship that's around it as well. So not only do you get the book, but why it's important, what its context is, what the author was in the time period that he wrote it, all the influences and everything. It's an extremely good series of books. High rate for students or like just the general reader who wants to know more about the books that he's reading. These texts are extremely good, and you should look for them, at least in my opinion. All right, so that's Caleb Williams, William Golden. All right, next up after that is the short stories of Samuel Beckett, More Pricks Than Kicks. I have not read this book, so I can't really discuss much of it. I could read the back of it. That'd probably bore the hell out of you, so I won't do it again. But Samuel Beckett is one of the great American writers. And then I found these two, which are two of the three volumes of Dante's The Divine Comedy, right? You have number 2, Purgatory, and number 3, Paradise. And the first one is Hell, isn't it? Right? So basically, it's probably the greatest Italian book ever written, or poem, because it's poetry, right? So But basically, it's about Dante going into the depths of hell with Virgil. I think it's Virgil, and and then that's the first volume. You go through all the different levels of hell, all right? And then the second volume go into purgatory, which is basically, isn't that a Catholic thing where the question comes up that, okay, so let's say Jesus is coming back to judge everybody, right? And he hasn't come back yet. What happens to all the people that have died since his crucifixion and resurrection, um, to now, because he hasn't come back yet? So what are you going to do with all the dead people that haven't been judged yet? Well, they all go to purgatory, right? So at least that's my understanding of it. A scholar could probably correct me on any of my errors. Um, but basically, Dante um, wrote that, then purgatory, and then what he thought heaven or paradise was like. So basically, it's it's probably the greatest piece of literature ever written by an Italian. All right, so um, but I couldn't find the first volume, so I was at the thrift store. I found the second volume. I found the third volume, and I'm going, "Where's the first one? Where's the first one?" But it sells so well that I'll be able to sell the two without the third, without the first. I mean, so all right. So I think that is everything. Oh no, one more thing. All right. So I found this album, and it's The Church for only $12. You know The Church, the Australian band. Um, Basically, when was this? When was this album? Got to be like the mid '80s, right? Yeah, 1982. All right. So this is their first American album or Canadian album. All right, but they had released this album as this is a self-titled album, but they released it. I can't remember the name of the first album in Australia, but basically they released their first album in Australia, which has much of the songs on this because this is basically the export version of their first album. And it's self-titled. It's not the same name. So basically, you can get the Australian version of this album and then the American version of this album. Um, and you know, most of the songs are the same, but they did change some of the songs from the original Australian album to this American album. Anyways, the Church. What can I say about the Church? I got into a discussion online, um, asking Australians what they thought was the greatest band or artist ever from Australia. You know, you had people saying AC/DC and others, but the one that came up the most was the Church. So, you know, you had Men at Work, you had Midnight Oil, you had, those more popular bands, AC/DC, but the one that they mentioned the most was the Church. And I go, the Church. And, I only knew one song from the Church at that time, and that was that popular one that came out in the mid 80s. I'll put it here. Um, uh, and I go, okay, I liked the song, but I never really went and got into the Church. The band that I really liked was Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. I find, like, if I was to argue any band, which is the greatest Australian band, I think it would be Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. I listened to, well, I picked up Let Love In. I listened to that. And I listened to that so many times that I wore out the CD. And then from there, I went and I collected like a good 4 or 5 other CDs from him and his band, and I listened to those as well, right? And I said, yeah, this is the best band out of Australia that I've listened to. So, but when people kept talking about the Church, I went, okay, maybe I need to look into the Church more, right? So I started looking around for CDs and couldn't find any, and then I found this one just now recently. So I'm gonna pull out the record player and I'm gonna play that and see how that is, and see if the accolades match the music. Basically, uh, they're kind of like new wave alternative rock. Um, their usual lineup is drums and 2 lead guitars. and a bass guitar. So two leads rather than one lead and one bass. They have two lead guitars, so it should be interesting to listen to. We'll see. But this is their first American release. Basically has much of the songs that were on their first Australian release, but the track list did change a bit. So, but probably their greatest song most people mentioned is on this, and it's "The Unguarded Moment." So, if you really like, let me know if you really like that song. You heard it and you really like it. But it's the first. I think it's the first. Yeah, it's the first song on this album, their self-titled album, right? So, and that's everything, I think. So, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing. I would appreciate it. And I'll talk to you in my next video. And you have a great day. Bye for now.